Number 4, that is the number of days left before the ceasefire expires. Wednesday, April 22nd. That is the deadline. That is when the clock hits 0. And as of this morning, both sides are further apart than they were when the ceasefire began. Here's what happened in the last 24 hours. Iran opened the Strait of Hormuz on Friday. Oil prices dropped 11%, the single largest one-day drop since the war began. The S&P 500 hit an all-time high. Markets exhaled. The world thought the worst was over. Then the United States said the blockade stays. Then Iran closed the strait again. Then Trump said, and these are his exact words, on Air Force One to reporters, "Maybe I won't extend it, but the blockade is going to remain, and unfortunately we'll have to start dropping bombs again." Let that sink in. Open, closed, bombs, all in less than 24 hours. And the ceasefire expires in 4 days. Almost nobody is running the actual numbers on what this 24-hour sequence reveals about where this conflict actually stands. That is what this brief is for. I'm James Caldwell. This is Stratford Brief. Let's get into it. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to give you 4 things the headline coverage is not giving you. First, the precise sequence of what happened on Friday and Saturday, statement by statement, decision by decision. Because when you read the exact words in the exact order they were made, the 24-hour reversal is not a surprise. It was built into the structure of Friday's announcement from the beginning. Second, the oil price story. Because the 11% single-day drop and the immediate recovery tell you something about how markets are reading the credibility of any agreement between these two sides. And the number that market analysts are now watching is not the oil price. It is the date, April 22nd. Third, what the IRGC said when it closed the strait again. Because the language Iran used on Saturday morning, piracy, maritime robbery, control has returned to its previous state, is not diplomatic language. It is the language of a country that has decided the negotiating window is closing, and that posture matters more than compromise right now. Fourth, what the next 4 days actually look like. Because the ceasefire expiring on April 22nd without an extension or a framework does not automatically mean bombs, but it does mean a specific set of decisions have to be made by specific people in a specific order. And the documented record of how those decisions have been made in this conflict so far tells you something important about what to expect. Stay with me. Each layer changes how you read the one before it. Let me give you the precise timeline. Because in a story moving this fast, the order of events is the argument. Friday, April 17th, early morning. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi posted on X. The statement was specific. In line with the ceasefire in Lebanon, the passage for all commercial vessels through Strait of Hormuz is declared completely open for the remaining period of ceasefire, on the coordinated route as already announced by Ports and Maritime Organization of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Read that sentence carefully. 2 things are embedded in it that almost nobody highlighted in the initial coverage. The first, the opening is explicitly conditional on the Lebanon ceasefire, not on a US-Iran nuclear deal, not on a permanent peace agreement, on the Lebanon ceasefire, which is a 10-day truce that can collapse independently of anything happening in Islamabad or Washington. The second, the phrase, coordinated route. It is the same language Iran has used since the ceasefire began to describe transit that requires coordination with Iranian naval authorities. The word coordination has been the diplomatic flashpoint between Washington and Tehran since April 8th. The American position has been that any route requiring IRGC coordination is not a free and open strait. Iran's position is that the coordinated route is exactly what open means. Friday's announcement used the same word. Nothing had changed on that dimension. But markets did not read those 2 embedded conditions. Markets read completely open, and oil dropped 11% in the immediate aftermath. The S&P 500 hit an all-time high. European stock indices jumped. German DAX up 2.2%. French markets up 2%. The UK's FTSE 100 up nearly 1%. The relief was global and immediate. The president reacted on Truth Social. His post read, "Iran has just announced that the Strait of Iran is fully open and ready for full passage. Thank you." The exclamation mark is in the original. The gratitude is real. And then, in a second post, made almost simultaneously, he added, "However, the naval blockade will remain in full force and effect as it pertains to Iran, only." Do that arithmetic slowly. Iran opens the strait. Trump celebrates. Trump says the blockade stays. The blockade is the reason Iran was considering the opening as leverage in the first place. If the blockade stays regardless of whether the strait is open, Iran has surrendered its primary remaining leverage without getting anything in return. Iran's parliamentary speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf said it on Friday afternoon, before the full reversal. The strait will not remain open if the blockade persists. That statement was not ambiguous. It was a direct conditional. Open strait requires lifted blockade. Lifted blockade requires nuclear deal. Nuclear deal did not happen in Islamabad. The conditions were never met. Saturday morning, Iran's Joint Military Command issued a formal statement. The language was specific and documented by AP, CBS News, the Irish Times, and ABC News. Control of the Strait of Hormuz has returned to its previous state, under strict management and control of the armed forces. The IRGC accused the United States of piracy and maritime robbery under the so-called blockade, and it warned that transit restrictions would continue as long as the American blockade of Iranian ports remained in effect. 24 hours. Open. Closed. The sequence was not chaotic. It was logical. The conditions that would have made opening sustainable were never present. The announcement was made anyway, and when those conditions were publicly confirmed to be absent, the announcement was reversed. Before we continue, if this is the analysis you have been looking for, subscribe to Stratford Brief and turn on notifications. We do not report what happened. We report what it means, who decided it, and what the numbers force them to do. New brief every day. Let's continue. The 11% single-day oil price drop on Friday is the most analytically revealing number in this entire 24-hour sequence. Not because of what it says about oil, because of what it says about the credibility of any announcement in this conflict. Before the war began on February 28th, Brent crude was trading at approximately $70 per barrel. At the peak of the Hormuz crisis, prices had risen approximately 40% since hostilities escalated, approaching or exceeding $100 in some sessions, according to CNBC reporting. The price trajectory over the past 7 weeks has been a direct function of perceived Hormuz access. Every announcement of opening produces a drop. Every closing or threat produces a spike. Friday's 11% single-day drop is the largest in the conflict. It represents the market's assessment that a genuine opening was underway, that the 600 vessels stranded in the Persian Gulf would begin moving, that the 20% of global oil supply that transits Hormuz daily would resume flow, and that the worst of the energy crisis was behind the global economy. By Saturday morning, oil prices had already recovered a significant portion of that drop. Let that sink in. The market opened Hormuz. The market closed it again. Within 24 hours. That is not oil price volatility. That is the market calculating, in real time, the probability that any announcement in this conflict will hold. Almost nobody is explaining what that pattern means for the next 4 days. It means that when the ceasefire expires on April 22nd, whether it is extended, replaced by a framework, or allowed to lapse, the market reaction will be immediate and significant in either direction. An extension or framework produces another oil price drop. A lapse without framework produces another spike, and the direction of that spike, whether toward $90 or toward $110, will be determined entirely by what Trump says and what Iran's military command does in the hours after the deadline. The number to watch is not the oil price itself. It is the gap between what the White House says about the state of negotiations and what the IRGC says about the state of the strait. Every time those two descriptions have diverged in this conflict, from the ceasefire announcement on April 8th, through the Islamabad collapse, through Friday's opening and Saturday's closing, the market has initially believed the optimistic version and then corrected when the operational reality contradicted it. The clock is running. 4 days. The market is watching every minute. The specific language Iran used on Saturday is worth examining precisely, because piracy and maritime robbery are not diplomatic formulations. They are the language of a country that has decided the frame of the conflict matters. The IRGC statement, carried by Iranian state television and confirmed by multiple Western news agencies, said the blockade constitutes piracy and maritime robbery under the so-called blockade. It said Iran had previously allowed managed passage in good faith following recent negotiations, and it said control of the strait has returned to its previous state. The phrase "in good faith" is analytically significant. It implies Iran made a concession, opening the strait, that was not reciprocated. The concession Iran made was conditioned on the Lebanon ceasefire. The reciprocation it expected, based on its own internal logic, was some corresponding movement on the American blockade. When the White House confirmed the blockade stays unconditionally, Iran's position became that it had acted in good faith and received nothing. The closure was framed as a restoration of the status quo, not as an escalation. That framing matters for the next round of negotiations, because a rigorous analysis requires acknowledging the counterargument that Iran's good faith opening was always conditional and always temporary, that the 24-hour sequence was not a genuine diplomatic gesture that collapsed, but a tactical move designed to test American flexibility and discover publicly that none existed. That argument is legitimate. The strongest version of it goes like this. Iran knew the blockade would not be lifted in response to an opening that required no concession from the United States. The opening was never intended to be permanent. It was intended to show the world that Iran was willing to allow passage, and that Washington was the obstacle, not Tehran. By closing again immediately after Trump confirmed the blockade stays, Iran produced a documented sequence in which it can argue, "We opened, they said blockade stays, we closed." The responsibility for closed Hormuz is now assignable to the American blockade in Iran's public narrative. That framing, whether accurate or not, is the one Pakistan's mediators will be working with when they attempt to arrange the next round of talks. And it is the framing that China, Russia, and the Gulf states will reference when they assess the conflict's next phase. Now let us address what Trump said, because the specific language he used on Air Force One to reporters late Friday night is the most significant statement from the American side in the past week. Maybe I won't extend it, but the blockade is going to remain, and unfortunately, we'll have to start dropping bombs again. 3 sentences, 3 distinct positions. The first is a conditional on the ceasefire extension. Maybe it gets extended, maybe it doesn't. The second is unconditional on the blockade. It stays regardless. The third is a threat about resuming military operations if no deal is reached. All 3 were delivered in a single breath to reporters aboard Air Force One. The White House press secretary had said conversations with Iran were productive and ongoing, and that they feel good about the prospects of a deal. That statement was made by a spokesperson. The sentence about dropping bombs was made by the president. When those 2 characterizations describe the same moment in the same negotiation, the distance between them is itself a documented fact. Let me give you the specific decision architecture of the next 4 days. Because Wednesday, April 22nd is not simply a date. It is a sequence of decisions that have to be made by specific people in a specific order. Decision 1, does Trump extend the ceasefire? The ceasefire began April 8th. It is a 2-week pause. Trump has said he may not extend it. The White House has signaled optimism about negotiations. Those 2 positions are not the same position. An extension requires Iran to agree to terms the United States finds acceptable enough to pause military operations. As of Saturday morning, Iran's military command has closed the strait and accused the United States of piracy. The conditions for an extension are not currently present. Decision 2. Does Pakistan arrange a second round of talks before Wednesday? Pakistan's Army Chief Asim Munir completed a 3-day visit to Tehran this week, working to arrange a second round of negotiations. But the specific obstacle that collapsed Islamabad, Iran's refusal to commit to not seeking a nuclear weapon, has not been resolved. A second meeting without resolving that obstacle produces another 21-hour session and another announcement of failure. Decision 3. What does Iran's nuclear position actually look like when the deadline arrives? The documented record shows that Iran arrived at Islamabad with 4 non-negotiable conditions that included guarantees around its nuclear program and the right to charge ships passing through the strait. The American position, as stated by Vance, was a commitment that Iran will not seek a nuclear weapon. Those 2 positions did not converge in 21 hours in Islamabad. There is no documented reason to believe they have converged in the 6 days since. Decision 4. What does Trump actually do at 11:59 p.m. on April 22nd? The president has said bombs are a possibility. He has also said he is optimistic. He has previously set deadlines and then modified them. The original deadline to open Hormuz produced the ceasefire rather than strikes. That precedent exists. But the precedent also shows that every new deadline arrives with a different operational context. On April 22nd, the blockade is fully implemented, 10 ships have been turned back, the mine-clearing operation is underway, and the IRGC has accused the United States of piracy. That is a different context than April 7th. The indicator that will tell you which direction Wednesday goes is specific. Watch the Pakistan channel. If Pakistan's foreign minister or army chief makes a public statement about a second round of talks with a specific date before Monday, April 20th, there is a pathway to extension. If no such announcement appears by Monday, the probability of ceasefire lapse rises sharply with every passing hour. The diplomatic window to arrange a meeting, agree on terms, and give both sides enough to announce a framework before Wednesday night is closing in real time. Let me give you the assessment the documented record demands. Iran opened the Strait of Hormuz on Friday based on a condition, the Lebanon ceasefire, that is itself temporary and fragile. The American blockade remained unconditionally. Iran closed the strait again within 24 hours. Oil dropped 11% and recovered within the same news cycle. Trump said he may not extend the ceasefire and that bombs are a possibility if no deal. The IRGC said the American blockade is piracy. Pakistan is working to arrange a second round of talks with no announced date. The ceasefire expires in 4 days. The 24-hour sequence of open-closed bombs is not chaos. It is the documented logical consequence of two sides that have fundamentally incompatible starting positions in a negotiation with a hard deadline and a military escalation option that both sides have now publicly threatened. The clock is not running metaphorically. It is running in the Persian Gulf, where 600 ships are still stranded. It is running in global energy markets, where the 11% drop and immediate partial recovery show that every announcement in this conflict now has a credibility discount built into the market's response. And it is running in Islamabad and Washington and Tehran, where the people who have to say yes to a framework, if one is going to exist by Wednesday, have not yet said it. The question this brief cannot answer, and the one the next 96 hours will force, is whether the gap between bombs and productive and ongoing conversations describes two different situations, or the same situation described by two different people with two different jobs. Watch the Pakistan channel, watch the oil price, and watch what Trump says on Tuesday, the day before the clock hits zero. The mainstream coverage tells you what happened. Stratford Brief tells you what it means. New brief tomorrow. I'm James Caldwell. Stay sharp.